11:42 p.m., Tuesday night. The street outside was silent, bathed in the soft glow of a flickering street lamp. Inside the modest apartment, the stillness was almost tangible. A single ceiling fan spun lazily above, its gentle hum the only sound breaking the quiet. Everything about this room spoke of routine. A worn armchair sat beside a small television, a pair of slippers neatly placed near the door, and a cup of tea, long forgotten, rested on the coffee table. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing screamed of distress or danger. In this ordinary space, a man lay unmoving on the floor. His face was peaceful, almost serene, as if he had simply drifted into sleep. The death was swift and silent, without violence or chaos. When paramedics arrived, they found no signs of struggle, no unusual marks, no evidence pointing to foul play. The conclusion was natural causes, a heart attack or some other medical event hastening his final breath. The case closed quickly, quietly, and without suspicion. Neighbors carried on with their lives, police files were shelved, and the world moved forward as though nothing had happened. CCTV cameras, however, were present. Mounted discreetly in the hallway outside the apartment and in the building's lobby, they recorded every moment of that evening. But like most of the time, they blended into the background, unnoticed and unquestioned. The footage was reviewed briefly and dismissed as routine, nothing irregular to report. The cameras, silent sentinels of the night, captured everything, yet their presence was overlooked, their potential ignored. Yet, beneath the surface of this seemingly normal scene lay an unsettling feeling, a quiet unease that something was off. The room was too calm, too orderly. The death was too perfect. There was no chaos, no outcry, no sign of the profound disturbance that a murder usually leaves behind. It was as if the event had been choreographed to fit seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life, designed to avoid detection entirely. No one suspected a crime had taken place because there was no reason to.
No vitnesses, no injuries, no disturbances.
The man's passing was accepted as routine, unremarkable, final. But this perfect murder didn't fail because of witnesses or physical evidence. It failed because the camera caught something no one thought to review. A single, easily overlooked moment that would unravel the entire story. The silent observer had recorded what the human eye missed, quietly holding the key to a truth that refused to stay buried. Beneath the surface of routine, a hidden frame waits, unnoticed, untouched, yet impossible to erase once seen. This footage wasn't lost or destroyed. It simply lingered in plain sight, overlooked by those convinced the case was closed. Stay with us as we trace the path of that fleeting moment, the one piece of evidence that quietly unraveled what seemed like a flawless crime. As the investigation deepens, the camera's silent eye reveals details no one expected. Subtle shifts, a shadow moving, a gesture frozen in time. It's within these fragments that the perfect murder begins to crack, exposing cracks in the narrative that had seemed so airtight. The truth was always there, recorded and waiting, but no one dared to look until now. What happened in that single second on CCTV is not just a clue. It's the turning point that transforms the story from closed case to a puzzle demanding answers. The footage forces us to reconsider every assumption, every alibi, every carefully constructed lie. This moment, small and easily missed, becomes the thread that pulls the entire mystery apart. In the quiet stillness of the recording, the hidden truth pulses beneath the surface, a truth that changes everything. It's a reminder that sometimes the most damning evidence isn't what's screamed or shouted, but what's silently captured, patiently waiting for the right eye to uncover it. Keep watching as the story unfolds, and the perfect crime reveals its fatal flaw. The morning began much like any other. The sun's pale light filtered softly through the curtains of a modest apartment, casting gentle shadows on the stillness within. Inside, the victim was discovered by a neighbor, who had noticed the unusual quietness that morning. There were no signs of forced entry, no frantic calls for help, no frantic banging on doors or windows. Instead, what greeted the neighbor was an unsettling calmness. A scene so ordinary that it barely registered as alarming at first glance. The body lay in a natural position, as if simply resting rather than succumbing to a violent end. Clothes were neat, the room orderly. There was no overturned furniture or scattered belongings to suggest a struggle had taken place. No shattered glass, no bloodstains, no overturned chairs. The absence of chaos was almost more disconcerting than any visible sign of violence might have been. It was the kind of stillness one might expect if someone had simply fallen asleep and never woken again. When authorities arrived, their initial assessment mirrored the impressions of the bystanders. The scene appeared unremarkable, almost routine. The victim's posture was peaceful, eyes closed, lips gently parted as if in repose. The lack of visible trauma, no bruises, cuts, or abrasions, reinforced the appearance of a natural passing. Emergency responders and police officers noted the absence of any indications that might suggest foul play. There was no trace of panic or haste. No signs that anyone had been trying to flee or fight back. Everything about the scene spoke of an unremarkable death, one that could easily be attributed to a sudden medical event or natural causes. Neighbors and passers-by who gathered during the initial moments accepted the situation without question. The general consensus was one of sympathy rather than suspicion. There was a quiet resignation in the air, a collective acknowledgement that sometimes a person's time simply comes without warning or reason. The victim was spoken of in hushed tones, remembered as someone who had lived quietly, without known enemies or troubles. This perception helped to solidify the belief that nothing more sinister was at play. Medical examiners, too, approached the case with a sense of routine. Without signs of physical trauma or struggle, the death was initially classified in line with common unexpected fatalities, the kind that sometimes happen silently and without dramatic circumstance. The coroner's report at this stage reflected the prevailing assumptions. The cause of death likely natural, perhaps cardiac arrest or a stroke. The absence of any obvious clue to the contrary meant there was little incentive to dig deeper. In retrospect, questioning the nature of this death would have seemed unreasonable, almost intrusive. There were no red flags, no suspicious behavior, no conflicting accounts from witnesses. The victim's life, as far as anyone knew, had been uneventful, and their passing fit neatly within the bounds of what society expects from a natural, unremarkable death. To voice doubt or suspicion at this point would have been to challenge the comfort of certainty, to disturb the fragile peace that comes with accepting death as a normal part of life. This acceptance, however, was precisely what allowed the truth to remain hidden beneath the surface. The death's outward normalcy was its greatest camouflage. It lulled everyone into a false sense of closure, masking the subtle irregularities that, although unnoticed at first, would later unravel the carefully constructed facade. In that quiet room, amid the stillness and order, the perfect crime had found its quietest moment, one that seemed utterly ordinary and unworthy of suspicion, yet held within it the seeds of a profound revelation. The absence of immediate suspicion hinged on a lattice of ingrained expectations and the weight of routine, effectively cloaking the unnatural within the guise of the familiar. The victim's medical history, punctuated by chronic ailments and a series of minor but persistent complaints, framed the death as an inevitable, if unfortunate, conclusion. This narrative, easily digestible and comfortably familiar, diverted attention from any notion of foul play. The mind's default assumption, grounded in statistical probability and social conditioning, favored natural causes. It was easier, safer, and more consistent with lived experience to accept the death as a quiet surrender to long-standing health struggles. Patterns played a decisive role in reinforcing this perception. Over years, the victim had exhibited a predictable decline, punctuated by hospital visits and medication adjustments, creating a rhythm that seemed to culminate naturally. Friends, family, and even medical personnel had grown accustomed to this trajectory, unconsciously rehearsing the narrative of gradual deterioration. The victim's routines, regular medication schedules, habitual rest periods, and a lifestyle constrained by physical limitations painted a portrait of vulnerability rather than victimhood. No sudden disruptions or anomalies emerged in the daily cadence to raise alarms. The environment itself, sterile and meticulously maintained, echoed the clinical inevitability of death rather than its violent interference. Human expectation, in this context, functioned as an unintentional accomplice. The collective mindset, steeped in an unconscious bias toward the ordinary, dismissed subtle irregularities as quirks of illness or age. Minor inconsistencies, an unusual pallor, a barely perceptible bruise, a fleeting moment of confusion, were filtered through a lens of benign interpretation. This cognitive framework was not only protective but also blinding, a psychological shield that insulated observers from confronting darker possibilities. The mind's propensity to seek coherence and closure favored a neat, uncomplicated explanation. Complexity was unwelcome, suspicion inconvenient. Environmental factors further entrenched the illusion. The setting was one where death was not anomalous but anticipated, a space designed for care and convalescence rather than confrontation or conflict. The sterile quietude, the presence of medical paraphernalia, and the absence of overt struggle all conspired to reinforce the appearance of a natural passing. The killer exploited this context expertly, ensuring that no trace of violence disturbed the scene's composed equilibrium. The absence of noise, disarray, or disturbance was itself a signal that no crime had occurred, a message read uncritically by those who encountered the scene. Moreover, the social dynamics surrounding the victim contributed to the invisibility of the crime. Relationships were marked by routine interactions devoid of conflict or animosity, allowing the assumption of goodwill to prevail. The victim's social circle, conditioned to interpret behavior through lenses of care and concern, failed to register the subtle manipulations at play. This social inertia, combined with the medical narrative, created a reinforcing loop that stifled doubt. The perfect crime thrived in this vacuum of suspicion, where assumptions shaped reality more than facts ever could. Ultimately, the killer's success derived from a deep understanding of human psychology and societal expectations. By constructing a scenario that fits seamlessly within established patterns, the perpetrator ensured that the mind's natural inclination toward order and predictability would override curiosity or skepticism. The death was not just a physical event but a psychological one, engineered to exploit the vulnerabilities of perception itself. It was a crime not merely of action but of omission of suspicion, omission of inquiry, omission of disruption. In this cold calculus, the absence of suspicion was not an oversight but a calculated outcome. The killer's hand was invisible precisely because it was aligned with the expected, the routine, and the natural. Human expectation did the heavy lifting, cementing the illusion of an unremarkable death. What remained hidden beneath the surface was a meticulously orchestrated deception, waiting patiently for the quiet unraveling that would expose the perfect crime gone wrong. The killer's strategy was far from impulsive or violent. It was a masterclass in subtlety and precision, leveraging the predictable rhythms of daily life to mask a fatal act. Instead of relying on brute force or overt confrontation, the plan was woven seamlessly into the fabric of routine, ensuring that the murder would be perceived as an unfortunate but natural event. Every step was designed to blend with the ordinary, exploiting the psychological assumptions people make about safety, time, and behavior. Timing was the linchpin of the entire scheme. The victim's day was studied meticulously, every habit noted, every small movement anticipated. The killer understood that people operate on autopilot, especially when it comes to their habits. By selecting a moment when the victim was alone and vulnerable, yet still within a context that would not raise alarms, the murder was camouflaged in normalcy. An early morning jog, a solitary coffee break, or an afternoon nap, these mundane activities provided the perfect cover. The killer knew that if the death occurred during such a moment, witnesses would be few, and even those nearby would likely dismiss any unusual sounds or signs as part of everyday life. The plan also hinged on the predictability of human psychology, particularly the tendency to trust established patterns. The victim's acquaintances, co-workers, and family members all operated under the assumption that nothing out of the ordinary would happen. This deep-seated expectation created a cognitive blind spot, a mental barrier against suspecting foul play. The killer relied on this blind spot to ensure that the death would be quickly accepted as natural or accidental. By aligning the murder with the victim's known behaviors and environment, the killer manipulated these assumptions into a powerful shield. Moreover, the killer's understanding of systems, both social and procedural, played a crucial role. Awareness of how emergency services respond, how medical examiners interpret signs, and how investigators prioritize leads informed the killer's choices. For instance, by choosing a method that left minimal physical evidence and mimicked natural causes, the killer anticipated the limitations of forensic analysis. The crime scene was curated to appear untouched, with no signs of struggle or entry that would trigger suspicion. Even the victim's personal effects were arranged to suggest continuity, reinforcing the illusion that life had simply taken a tragic turn. This orchestration extended to the manipulation of time itself. The killer factored in response windows, the typical delay between discovery and intervention, ensuring that by the time anyone noticed, the trail would have cooled. The victim's usual communication patterns were disrupted subtly but convincingly, so that the absence was noticed only after a reasonable interval. This delay capitalized on human tendencies to avoid immediate alarm over minor deviations, further embedding the narrative of an unremarkable death. In essence, the plan was a psychological chess game, anticipating moves and countermoves before they happened. The killer anticipated how people would process information, what details they would overlook, and how official systems would categorize the event. By operating within these predictable confines, the murder slipped beneath the radar, invisible not because it was hidden in shadows, but because it was illuminated by the light of the everyday. Yet, despite this careful construction, the killer underestimated the subtle friction of unpredictability. Small deviations, unnoticed by the killer but significant in hindsight, began to undermine the facade. The killer's confidence in routine and assumption became a vulnerability, exposing the cracks in what was meant to be a flawless plan. What was designed to be an invisible death was, in time, destined to unravel, proof that even the most carefully crafted illusions can falter when confronted with the complexity of human nature and chance. In many investigations, surveillance footage is often treated as a secondary resource, something to be consulted only when other leads have dried up or when a particular event demands visual confirmation. In this case, the existence of CCTV footage was known but overlooked during the initial stages of the inquiry. This oversight wasn't born out of negligence or incompetence, but rather emerged from ingrained procedural habits and the subtle ways technology tends to blend into the background of everyday life. Cameras, after all, are designed to be unobtrusive watchers, their presence fading into the periphery unless their relevance is explicitly triggered by an event or suspicion. The killer relied heavily on this very invisibility. By maintaining a routine that appeared ordinary and unremarkable, they ensured that no immediate alarm bells rang to warrant a review of the recordings. The footage, stored securely yet untouched, recorded hours of seemingly mundane activity. People coming and going, unexceptional moments that bore no initial hint of wrongdoing. Investigators, focused on physical evidence and witness testimonies that seemed more promising at first glance, naturally prioritized those leads. The absence of an overt trigger meant the CCTV remained just another silent observer, not a tool actively wielded in the pursuit of truth. Routine protocols within law enforcement further contributed to this delay. Typically, reviewing surveillance footage is a resource-intensive task. It demands time, personnel, and often specialized skills to sift through hours of video, looking for details that might not stand out. Unless there is a definitive reason, a crime witnessed on camera, a suspect identified through other means, or a critical timeline that needs verification, footage may be archived without immediate examination. This pragmatic approach, while efficient in many cases, inadvertently allowed crucial moments to remain unseen. The killer's calculated normalcy exploited these procedural blind spots, ensuring that the trail remained cold while the footage stayed locked away. Moreover, the environment where the cameras were installed played a subtle role. Positioned in locations typically associated with routine traffic, building entrances, hallways, parking lots, the footage was perceived as mundane. Without a specific incident flagged in those areas, the video was often relegated to a background asset rather than a frontline investigative tool. This perception is common in many security operations. Cameras serve more as deterrents and record keepers than as active participants in real-time problem solving. Their silent, passive nature means they rarely demand attention unless something visibly out of place occurs. The killer's confidence in this invisibility was a critical misjudgment, though. Over time, the very existence of the recordings became a silent witness, waiting patiently for the right moment to be called upon. When inconsistencies in alibis and subtle clues began accumulating, the investigators' approach shifted. Footage that had once seemed irrelevant turned into a treasure trove of corroborative evidence. The delay in reviewing the CCTV wasn't simply a lapse. It was a reflection of how routine procedures and human tendencies to prioritize the immediate and visible can allow even the most carefully planned crimes to momentarily slip through the cracks. In this case, the failure to initially examine the CCTV was less about oversight and more about the natural hierarchy of investigative focus. Physical evidence and direct testimonies hold immediate weight, while surveillance footage often waits quietly in reserve. The killer banked on this quiet reserve, counting on procedural inertia and the tendency for cameras to fade into the background. Yet, this reliance proved to be a miscalculation. The eventual scrutiny of the footage revealed details that were invisible to the naked eye and impossible to ignore once brought into the light. The cameras may have been ignored at first, but they never stopped watching, and in perfect crimes gone wrong, such silent witnesses are often the final arbiters of truth. The footage from the CCTV camera began as nothing more than a blur of everyday motions. A grainy, grayscale loop of the street corner just outside the storefront. People passed by with the predictable rhythm of routine. A pedestrian hurried along, eyes on a phone. A delivery cyclist paused briefly before continuing. A stray dog wandered lazily across the frame, uninterested in the world around it. The camera's angle, fixed and unyielding, captured these moments with a mechanical detachment, as if indifferent to the lives unfolding beneath its gaze. At first glance, the video offered little to arrest attention. The lighting was dull, shadows stretching unevenly as the afternoon waned. A bus rumbled past, its windows reflecting fleeting glimpses of passers-by, but no one lingered long enough to draw the eye. The camera's timestamp flickered in the corner, marking time with cold precision, yet the seconds slipped away without meaning. To any casual observer, this was simply the background noise of an ordinary day, nothing more than the usual ebb and flow of urban life. In these frames, the subtlety of the recorded details seemed almost designed to be overlooked. A man adjusted his hat as he waited at the crosswalk, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. A woman, carrying a tote bag, glanced over her shoulder once before disappearing down a side street. Through the lens, these small gestures blurred into the mundane choreography of the everyday. The camera's resolution rendered faces indistinct, expressions muted, and movements stiff, devoid of drama or significance. Yet, as the footage looped continuously, certain small patterns began to emerge, barely perceptible to the casual eye. The same figure appeared briefly, lingering near the entrance of the building, though never entering. A delivery van stopped for a moment too long, the driver stepping out only to check his phone before moving on. None of these actions shouted for attention. They were merely the flickers of life caught on tape, easily dismissed as incidental and irrelevant. The image quality was far from sharp. The graininess veiled much in shadow and light, making it difficult to discern anything beyond the obvious. Reflections on the glass doors created ghostly overlays, adding to the sense of visual confusion. A discarded newspaper fluttered across the pavement, momentarily obscuring a figure's feet before being swept away by the breeze. These elements combined into a tableau of noise, distractions without context, fragments that could be interpreted in countless ways or simply ignored as visual clutter. No alarms sounded within the frame, no hurried footsteps, no sudden movements. The street remained calm, the camera's watchfulness steady and unblinking, recording everything yet revealing nothing overt. This was the kind of footage that investigators might glance at briefly, then set aside, overwhelmed by more pressing leads or clearer evidence. It was the kind of recording that faded quickly from memory, relegated to the digital archives where hours of uneventful video accumulate. Still, beneath this veneer of normalcy lay the undeniable truth that the camera never blinked, never faltered in its silent vigil. It observed the seemingly trivial with unwavering attention, capturing every nuance of light and shadow, every hesitation and glance. In the context of perfect crimes gone wrong, such footage often waits patiently, unnoticed and unappreciated, until the moment when those small, Easily dismissed details align and reveal a story previously hidden in plain sight. For now, however, the scene remained ordinary, just everyday life passing by a static lens. The subtle movements, the unremarkable pauses, the unnoticed interactions, all blended into an unbroken stream of routine. The camera recorded everything, but its quiet testimony was still buried beneath layers of apparent insignificance, waiting for the right eyes to uncover what had been hidden all along. The dim glow of the monitor flickered quietly in the otherwise silent room as Emma settled into the creaky chair, the weight of hesitation pressing down on her shoulders. She stared at the screen, fingers hovering awkwardly above the keyboard, uncertain if she should even proceed. The footage had been there all along, a mundane slice of life caught on a security camera, but only now, after days of restless pondering, had she summoned the courage to watch it again, this time with a sharper eye. The familiar frames rolled slowly, each second dragging with an almost deliberate slowness, as if the video itself was reluctant to reveal its secrets. At first, everything seemed banal. People passing by, shadows stretching lazily across cracked pavement, the occasional flutter of a newspaper in the wind. Nothing out of the ordinary. Her eyes traced the movements, searching for something she couldn't quite define, a trace of disruption in the seamless fabric of the scene. The subtle rhythm of daily life lulled her into a false sense of security. Yet beneath that calm surface, a nagging disquiet began to creep in, worming its way through her thoughts like a persistent echo. Then, something caught her attention. A brief flicker, hardly noticeable unless you were looking for it. A figure paused at the edge of the frame, just for a moment, longer than anyone else did. The hesitation in that stillness felt unnatural, like a breath held too long before a plunge. Emma rewound the clip, watching it again and again, trying to convince herself that it was nothing more than a random pause, a glitch in the footage or a trick of the light. But the feeling that something was off refused to fade. Her heart skipped when she noticed the figure's hand, a small movement that didn't align with the rest of the body's posture, a twitch that betrayed an underlying tension. The fingers flexed and curled in a way that didn't match the casual stance, as if the person was gripping or releasing something invisible. For a moment, the camera captured a shadow that seemed darker, denser, as if the light itself recoiled in that space. Emma leaned closer, squinting, but the grainy quality of the video blurred the details just enough to keep the truth tantalizingly out of reach. Uncomfortable with the uncertainty, she paused the video, her breath shallow. The room felt suddenly colder, the silence heavier. She replayed the clip once more, this time focusing on the timestamp in the corner. It didn't add up. The supposed moment of hesitation occurred a full 5 minutes before the event it was meant to precede. That chronological mismatch twisted her understanding of the sequence, like a sentence rearranged to confuse meaning. How could a reaction come before its cause? Her mind swirled with possibilities. Maybe the camera's clock was wrong. Maybe the footage was edited. But none of these explanations fit neatly. Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The inconsistency was small, almost trivial, but it refused to be ignored. It gnawed at the edges of her confidence, unsettling the neat narrative she had clung to until now. Perhaps it was nothing, just a technical hiccup or a flaw in the recording, yet the discomfort it stirred was undeniable. The more she scrutinized the frames, the more the scene seemed to warp, shifting between clarity and confusion like a mirage on a hot day. She glanced away from the screen, rubbing her temples. A part of her wanted to dismiss the unease, to chalk it up to overthinking, but another part, the quieter, more insistent part, urged her to dig deeper. The footage was no longer just a passive record of everyday life. It was a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit, a whisper of something unresolved lurking beneath the surface. The hesitation, the twitch, the impossible timestamp. They formed a subtle code that resisted explanation, and Emma knew that ignoring it would be a mistake. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the answers, if they existed at all, were buried somewhere in the blurry shadows just beyond reach. The moment suspicion began was not a sudden revelation but a quiet unraveling. A slow seep of doubt that left her suspended between certainty and confusion, caught in a liminal space where nothing made sense and everything felt precariously fragile. The CCTV footage was initially dismissed as another routine piece of evidence amid the pile of reports and witness statements. But as investigators began to scrutinize the grainy images more closely, it became clear that this was no ordinary record. The footage, captured from a nondescript street camera, showed movements and timings that did not align with the established timeline of events. This discrepancy was the first ripple in the delicate web of assumptions that had held the case together, and it quickly grew into an unignorable chasm. At first glance, the footage appeared innocuous, a few indistinct figures moving past the camera's limited range. But as the frames were enhanced and analyzed frame by frame, details emerged that contradicted the initial narrative. The victim's supposed last known whereabouts, as reported by those closest to her, did not match the timestamps on the video. She appeared in the footage at a time when she was believed to have already been at home, resting peacefully. This was the first sign that something was fundamentally wrong with the official account. More puzzling was the presence of a shadowy figure who lingered near the victim's residence just minutes before the estimated time of death. This figure's movements suggested a familiarity with the surroundings, a confidence that did not fit the profile of a random passerby. The investigators noted how this person seemed to avoid the camera's direct gaze, slipping in and out of frame with calculated precision. This behavior hinted at premeditation rather than chance, challenging the earlier assumption that the death was a sudden, natural event. The timeline was shattered piece by piece. Witnesses who had provided statements about the victim's final hours were suddenly suspect, their accounts at odds with the cold, unblinking eye of the camera. The footage's stark visual testimony could not be ignored or explained away by simple mistakes or faulty memories. It forced a reevaluation of every detail, every claim, and every assumption previously accepted as truth. A turning point came when forensic experts cross-referenced the timestamp of the footage with the medical examiner's report. The report had initially concluded that death was likely due to natural causes, citing no signs of foul play. But the footage showed activity inconsistent with someone who was supposedly incapacitated or unconscious at that time. This contradiction raised a chilling possibility. The victim may have been alive and conscious during a period when the timeline suggested otherwise, opening the door to an entirely different scenario. The realization dawned slowly but inevitably among the team. The death could no longer be explained as natural. There were too many inconsistencies, too many unanswered questions that the footage illuminated. It was as if the video peeled back a layer of illusion, revealing a darker, more complex truth lurking beneath the surface. The quiet unraveling of suspicion transformed into a determined pursuit of answers, fueled by the newfound evidence that refused to be ignored. From this moment on, the investigation took on a different tone. What had once seemed like an unfortunate but straightforward case evolved into a puzzle demanding meticulous scrutiny. The footage became the cornerstone of the inquiry, a silent witness that exposed the cracks in alibis and the shadows in testimonies. It was clear that the truth was hidden not in what people said, but in what the camera saw, and what it revealed was far from innocent. The impact of the footage extended beyond just the timeline. It challenged preconceived notions about the victim's final moments, the people around her, and the circumstances that led to her death. It forced the investigators to confront uncomfortable possibilities, that someone close to the victim might have had motive and opportunity, and that the death was not a tragic accident but a carefully orchestrated event. The implications were profound, shifting the narrative from one of natural loss to potential criminal intent. As the pieces began to fall into place, the team understood that the footage was not merely a record, it was a turning point. Changed everything. The investigation, once stalled in the fog of uncertainty, now surged forward with renewed purpose. The death, once easy to explain away, demanded justice, and the camera's unyielding gaze was the key to unlocking the truth that had remained just out of reach for too long. The footage, initially dismissed as mere background noise, proved to be the unexpected fulcrum on which the entire case pivoted. What the killer had intended as a silent witness to disguise their presence instead became an uncompromising judge, revealing fractures in the carefully constructed facade. It was not a confession, nor a dramatic outburst caught on tape, but a quiet, passive element, an unblinking observer that refused to lie or bend to the killer's narrative. The irony was stark. The very mechanism designed to obscure the truth instead illuminated it with chilling clarity. As the investigators revisited the frames, their eyes no longer skimmed over the footage but studied it with meticulous attention. Subtle details emerged, shadows shifting inconsistently, footsteps that didn't align with the supposed timeline, and a faint reflection in a window revealing an unexpected figure. Each anomaly chipped away at the illusion of perfection. The killer's plan, which had relied on alibis and controlled movements, was undone by a silent camera that had recorded everything without judgment or intent. In the unfolding realization, it became clear that the killer had underestimated the power of passive observation. They had orchestrated a scenario with precision, blocking witnesses, fabricating motives, and manipulating evidence. Yet they failed to anticipate that the camera would capture their hesitation, the slight tremor in their hands, the fleeting glance away from the scene. These imperceptible human moments, invisible to the naked eye during the act, were immortalized in pixels and timestamps. The footage transformed into an unintentional diary of guilt. With every playback, the narrative constructed by the killer unraveled further. Their movements, once thought deliberate and rehearsed, were now revealed as reactive and uncertain. The killer's attempt to control the environment was subverted by the camera's impartial recording, which did not discriminate between truth and deception. The footage, in its silent persistence, became a mirror reflecting the inconsistencies of their story back at them. The investigators, piecing together the timeline anew, found themselves guided by these silent clues. What was once a tangle of conflicting testimonies now aligned with the evidence on screen. The camera's presence, though passive, imposed a relentless order on the chaos. The killer's alibi crumbled not because of an overt confession or a slip of the tongue, but because the footage revealed the impossibility of their claims. The sequence of events, as frozen in the video, contradicted their carefully crafted version of reality. What made this unraveling particularly poignant was its quiet inevitability. There was no grand reveal, no dramatic confrontation caught in the act. Instead, the collapse occurred gradually, as layers of denial peeled away in the face of incontrovertible visual facts. The killer's elaborate plan was dismantled not by force or accusation, but by the unyielding gaze of an indifferent observer. In this way, the footage transcended its role as mere documentation. It became a silent prosecutor, delivering its verdict without words or emotion. The killer's hubris lay in assuming that silence would shield their deeds, but silence proved to be their undoing. The camera, impartial and unblinking, exposed the fatal truth that no scheme, however perfect in conception, can withstand the passive, persistent light of evidence. The investigation moved forward on this foundation, the footage serving as the cornerstone that transformed suspicion into certainty. Justice, once stalled, was now an inexorable force propelled by the relentless, silent testimony of the camera. The killer's plan, once deemed flawless, was revealed as fragile and flawed, undone by the quiet truth recorded without prejudice or pause. Perfection in crime is a myth whispered among those who seek to outwit justice, a seductive illusion that crumbles not because of careless errors, but because of the invisible threads woven by human nature, patterns that no amount of cunning can fully erase. In the case we have just unraveled, it was never a slip of the tongue, a forgotten fingerprint, or a reckless act that brought the killer down. Instead, it was the recurrence of subtle behaviors, the echo of decisions made under pressure, the silent choreography of habits repeated without conscious thought. The footage that anchored this investigation did more than capture a moment. It exposed an unbroken narrative of choices and responses, a sequence where each act was a link in a chain that led inevitably to exposure. The murderer's plan was intricate, designed to evade immediate detection, yet it was the very consistency, the patterns seen in gait, timing, and interaction, that betrayed the carefully constructed facade. This was not a story of chaos or randomness, but of order twisted into criminal intent, and it was that order that investigators traced with patient resolve. One might wonder why these patterns persist, why those who believe themselves above scrutiny fail to break free from the invisible scripts they follow. The answer lies in the essence of human behavior. Habit is a powerful force, often imperceptible even to those who rely on it most. In attempting to control every variable, the killer inadvertently created a predictable rhythm, a signature as unique and revealing as a fingerprint. It is this paradox that turns the perfect crime into a flawed one. The more one tries to erase mistakes, the more one reveals the self through repetition. As the layers of deception peeled away, the story grew quieter, more unsettling. Justice did not roar. It whispered through the lens of a camera, through the steady hand of an investigator, through the inexorable logic of pattern recognition. The killer's silence was their undoing, but also a haunting reminder that no secret remains hidden forever, not in a world where every action leaves a trace, and every trace tells a story. If this revelation left you unsettled, if you found yourself drawn to the fragile boundary between innocence and guilt, then prepare for the next tale. A crime so meticulously buried it almost vanished from memory. What kept it alive? What cracked the silence? Join us as we delve deeper into the shadows, where the past refuses to stay buried, and the truth waits patiently to be uncovered. The story that follows might just change the way you see the line between perfect and undone. Don't miss it.